I'm Jerome Davis. I'm the artistic director of Burning Coal Theater Company, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our second instance of Afterthoughts, which is a new series that we've created here at Burning Coal to take the place of our audience talkbacks, which are not much happening these days because we don't have much audience, but we do have an audience for our current production, 100 Words for Snow, by Taddy Hennessy, which is running at Burning Coal through this Sunday, which is November 1st. So for those of you who haven't seen it yet, get on the waiting list. All the tickets are sold out, but we are finding ways to squeeze people in. So get on the waiting list if you'd like by giving us a ring at 834-4001 or shoot us an email at info@burningcoal.org. Our guest today is Caroline Hamilton, who is quite an extraordinary explorer, has led several expeditions to both the North and the South Pole, I believe. Caroline, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yep. And you're speaking to us today from London, but you're from Scotland originally. Is that right?
I'm not from Scotland originally, but I have been living in Scotland for the last sort of 10 years or so, up in the Northwest Highlands. Very, very beautiful.
I'm sure it is. We were over there once with a group doing a play in London, and a bunch of us went up to Edinburgh, which is not quite what you're describing, but it's close enough. And they were all smitten, and we had to pry them away from there to get them back to London for the show. Caroline, do you know 100 Words for Snow? Is this play at all something that's come across your radar so far?
I don't know it, I regret to say. Obviously, I've read up about it before this session. It sounds absolutely fascinating. No, but I don't know it.
It's a fun piece, and it's about exploring and particularly exploring the North Pole. But it's really there's a lot of other themes in it too. But it is a fun piece about a young girl, a 15-year-old girl whose father very suddenly passes away. He's in a traffic accident, and he had always wanted to explore the North Pole. Was a geography teacher, but never really left his study, or his classroom. And she realizes now that the time has passed for that. And so she decides, as a 15-year-old might, that she's going to go alone to the North Pole and scatter his ashes there. Right. So she's going to get him there, even though he couldn't get there himself. And I think you can see the broader implications of that as a theme for things that are happening in our world today. Sure. But tell us a little bit about your life early on. How did you get interested in this sort of expedition or exploration? How did that come about for you?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, growing up, I was always fascinated by stories, bipolar stories about Captain Scott, about Shackleton, about Nansen, all these people. So I was always fascinated by it. But I never thought that I would be a polar explorer, just because, it was an historical thing in my mind, and it was all men with beards and frostbitten fingers and things like that. So it didn't occur to me. But then what happened was that a friend of mine started dating a polar explorer, a real life polar explorer. And as I talked to him, I kind of thought, well, damn it, if he can do it, so can I. Mm-hmm. And that's how it began. And he gave me that opportunity, actually, because he gave me a window into it and, and indeed helped put together the first expedition.
And you have led an expedition that was made up primarily of women. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I led the first ever all-women's expedition to the North Pole. And then from there, 5 of us went on and became the first British group of women to go to the South Pole. And then from there, went back to the North Pole. And I'm part of the only all-women team. I still remain part of the only all-women team to have gone to both the South and the North Poles. And when I say going to the South Pole and the North Pole, I mean doing the whole expedition. So, the whole environment for going to the pole now has opened up hugely. So, you can actually take an aeroplane to within sort of 60 miles of the pole and do a last degree expedition and so on. But very, very few people have skied all the way to the North Pole or to the South Pole. And if you go all the way to the North Pole, then you need to start from the edge of land. And right. we started from the north coast of Canada.
Oh, okay.
And when we went back to the North Pole the second time, which is way back now in 2002, it took us 81 days to get there. 500 miles in 81 days.
How many women were in the expedition?
So when the very first expedition was, as I said, the first all-women's expedition to the North Pole, and we structured it as a relay. Mm-hmm. So we put an advert out basically and said, or I put an advert out saying, I'm looking for women to go to the North Pole. And we had this overwhelming response. Over 200 women said they wanted to come too.
Wow.
And bear in mind that women just did not do expeditions like that in those days. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we had this overwhelming response. So we held selection weekends on Dartmoor, which is in England, mm-hmm. a very wild place. Told them all about the North Pole, thinking that they might be put off, but not at all. They just wanted to come more than ever. And off we went. We had 2 female guides who went the whole distance, 2 Canadians, and that was way back in 1997.
In 1997, and the women who applied, the 200 or so applicants, were they from exclusively from England, or were they from other places as well?
They were all from the UK, yes. Although one was German, who came on the expedition. One was German and one was Irish. So they weren't all British, but they all lived in the UK, yes.
How many did you end up taking?
20. So we had 5 teams of 4. Mm-hmm.
So one team would travel a certain distance and then be met at the rendezvous place. Is that the way?
Well, they were. Well, it wasn't really a rendezvous place. It was basically each team would travel as far as they could in a time period of about 2 weeks. And then then they would be picked up and the new team put down to wherever they had got to. I mean, the thing that you know about the North Pole is that going to the North Pole is that you're on ice that is melting.
Yeah.
It's melting through climate change, but it's also melting every year. So you start your expedition in February or March when the ice is as solid as it can be at the end of the winter.
Right.
Then you're in a race against time, and you have got to get to the pole before the ice melts too much. You can keep going because you're not that heavy, but the problem is when a heavy aeroplane comes to land to pick you up, that's when things are really unsafe. So when we went, you could, and this is a real indication of climate change, which is that when we went in both to 1997 and then 2002, the end of the season, as it were, was kind of the end of May, beginning of June. In 2002, we got there, we arrived on June the 2nd, and that was okay. But now, if you go on an expedition to the North Pole, like one of these or just go and land there, and so on, the end of the season is at the end of April. Because the ice is melting so much more. So I doubt very much that certainly in my lifetime, I doubt very much that anybody will ever do an expedition all the way from the coast of Canada to the North Pole again.
Because it would simply take too long to get there, right? Wow, that's interesting. Now, just before we start talking about climate change, which I would love to do in a moment, if you're game for that. But what do you take with you on an expedition like this? What kinds of things do you need to carry with you? Obviously, clothing, food. What else does one bring for one of these expeditions?
Well, I think one of the great things about it, and one of the things that I just love, is that total self-sufficiency. So you ask what you take. Well, obviously, you take what is essential. You just take essentials. You don't take any luxury items because it's all weight. You've got a sledge behind you, which you're pulling behind you. So every little thing is going to weigh you down and slow you down. So you're right, you take food. You take some you wear most of your clothing, certainly, particularly since it's coldest when you, in terms of the season, it's coldest when you set off. So you've probably got wearing pretty much all your clothing at the beginning. You've obviously got some spare gloves, you've got some spare things, But in general, you're going to wear the same outfit. You're wearing the same clothes all the way. So every day. You take cookers, fuel for your cookers.
Sure.
You take a sleeping bag, right, a mat to sleep on, and then a tent, and lots of things to fix things if they go wrong. And that's about it. And probably one luxury item. My luxury item has always been a pair of nail scissors.
Ah, okay. I was going to guess Belgian chocolate or something like that. But
oh, well, yeah, Belgian chocolate would be lovely. But I mean, in terms of food, what we're taking is a vast quantity of chocolate. So actually, chocolate is an essential.
There's a part of the play where the young girl tells a story about Peter. I think his name's Freudkin. Is that his name? Who was frozen into a hole in the ground during a storm. Do you know that story?
I don't know that story.
Apparently, the only way he was able to get out was to. This is a little. I'm going to use a bit of language, guys. So if you're delicate, cover your ears. He took a shit, molded it into the shape of a chisel, waited for it to freeze, and then hacked his way out of the ice. So does that sound like a familiar story?
It sounds ingenious. It sounds possible. Yeah. I find it slightly incredible, but yeah, you never know exactly. You have to think of everything.
Teddy, who wrote the play, followed Nansen's journey. Actually, she went to Norway, to Svalbard, I think, and then to that Russian base, which is at the 89th parallel. And then she did, in fact, hike the rest of the way. I think she did. I'm not sure about that last part. She might have taken a helicopter there, but she did an awful lot of research on it. When you're going, one other question I was going to ask, in '97, was GPS successful enough that you could use something like that to navigate, or were you strictly relying on maps, or how did you navigate?
Yes. So we had. We didn't use the GPS much. In fact, I've never used GPS much, partly because of the battery power.
Sure.
So the batteries run out very, very quickly, and what you find is that all your equipment behaves very differently in the extreme cold. And so, and batteries is an obvious thing, which is that they run out very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's too consumptive of power to have in my view, to use your GPS all the time. But so we would mainly navigate using a compass and also the sun, which is a really useful thing to navigate with. As long as you know which degree of longitude you're on, and you know the time, then you can and you know that the sun if you're going north, you know that the sun must be directly behind you at midday.
Right.
So that's a very, kind of use the sun and use your body like a I can't think of the word now, it's gone straight up, a sundial. Use your body like a sundial.
Sure.
And you can keep going. So the GPS we would use at the beginning and the end of the day to check our position, basically. And of course, you're on moving ice. It's a constly dynamic environment being on the sea ice.
So you can't lay down signposts along the way for the next traveler to follow.
Absolutely not.
Wouldn't be useful.
Absolutely not. So and it's quite possible to wake up in the morning. In fact, it's inevitable that you will wake up in the morning in a different place to where you went to sleep, because you will have drifted. Yeah. And very frequently you wake up further south than where you went to sleep. Which is kind of depressing.
Sure.
But every now and again you get a bit of positive drift, so actually you probably, you end up going further north than you might otherwise, because you're on some moving ice. And then when you get to the pole, so this is quite good fun, really, because you have to track down the pole. So you've used your compass, you're getting there, but actually it's quite easy to go over the top of the world and go past the North Pole, or to slip round it. So you have to use your GPS effectively to track down the pole. And again, when you're getting close, you know, you can then find yourself going past it, and then you have to go back and sort of zigzag around until you've kind
Waste time, yeah.
until you've nailed it down. Yeah.
What's in your journeys? What's the most dangerous moment that you've experienced? I'm just curious.
Well, in the north, the principal. I mean, well, the principal hazards are the cold, because things happen very fast in the cold, and you can get, you know, bad frostbite.
Right.
Falling through the ice into the water, which
Did
obviously
that happen?
very short. Yeah, fell through the ice many times actually, but always got out, I'm glad to say. And I think, and then there are also polar bears. Now, polar bears were probably the only drama that we didn't have in 2002. We had terrible weather, so it was extremely much colder than we expected to begin with. And then we also had a number of terrible storms, and quite early on in the expedition. So I think that was probably the most dangerous thing that happened to us, was that we got caught in a storm and we had to wrap ourselves in the tent. We couldn't put the tent up because the wind was so great. And we had to just lie on the ice wrapped in the tent fabric.
Wow.
Just kind of wedged together like sausages. And I just remember hearing the flapping of the tent fabric and shouting at Pom and Anne. So I was with two colleagues, Pom and Anne, and Pom was here. I was lying like that. Her face was here, and I'd have to shout at her above the wind. Wow. And then shout at Anne, who was just here over my shoulder, and I get this tiny little voice coming back. And so we could feel, and then the snow was all burying us. So we were sort of being buried alive by the snow as it was being thrown on top.
Sure.
And we just lay there, and we lay there for 51 hours waiting for the wind to stop.
Wow. Just out of curiosity, would a bear come after a group as large as 5, or do they wait for smaller numbers before they attack, or do you have a sense of that right now?
I believe they'll come after. Yes, they're pretty brave. So I don't think it makes much difference what size of group. And you hear some pretty awful stories of people being attacked, particularly in Svalbard. Some quite big groups. So I think it's a lot to do with, well, it's a lot to do with how hungry they are, and of course, in the Arctic, they may have got trapped on a bit of ice and be extreme, especially in somewhere like Svalbard, they may well have got trapped when the ice has melted, and so they've actually had to endure the winter with not enough to eat and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And that will drive them to do anything.
Were you required to? Did you have a gun with you? Did you bring?
Yes, we had a gun. Yeah, but we never had to fire it. I'm glad to say.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. So why do this?
It is absolutely wonderful, is all I can say. I mean, I talked earlier about the self-sufficiency, and that is absolutely right. But it is overwhelmingly beautiful. It's unlike anything that you'll see anywhere else, and the colours, it's a complete assault on your senses, everything about it. It's not just the way it looks, it's the way it smells, the way the air tastes, the sound. And I love the sea ice. I just love the sea ice, the fact that it is moving all the time. It's kind of alive, you know, and you can, you know, sometimes you see it break in front of you and then another piece goes past. And it is dangerous, but it's so exciting, so enlivening. It's wonderful.
Did you notice a set of characteristics or a characteristic that was common to all the women who joined your expedition?
I think you need a sense of humour.
I would hope, yeah.
Yeah, I think they all had a sense of humour. Yeah. I think you've just got to be unfazed, you know. It's sort of, you just got to keep going, and it's one step at a time. It's a trite thing to say, but it's, you know, kind of one step at a time, and things will go wrong, and you've just got to get on with it. You know, you can't ever sort of allow yourself to think this is horrid. You know, I mean, there are moments where it's absolutely awful, you know, and you're incredibly cold and things have gone wrong, like any time in life, and you've just got to not be fazed by that and be single-minded and just keep going.
It's kind of a metaphor for life in general, I guess. It kind of puts it all into one little moment in your life, and that's very.
It's a huge metaphor for life, and because there's so little external, you kind of, you're in a bubble together. The rest of the world has completely fallen away. It's impossible to even imagine what it's like back, being back at home. You're not interested really. You're just so focused on that, on the moment, and on staying alive, and looking after your teammates and all of that. That you're in this kind of bubble, and you realise within yourself that your own emotions go up and down. There's a kind of natural rhythm to them. I think it's quite easy to think, things go wrong. It's because you got out of bed late, or you missed the bus, or something, some other factor. But what you do, you learn so much about yourself. You kind of see yourself absolutely peeled back. And you see all your emotions go up and down. Some days you have a really good day, and some days a bad day, and it's got nothing to do with anything other than yourself. And you have to live with that.
Yeah, all those
things. You have to live with that, and you have to also to live with the fact that the people around you have also seen you absolutely peeled back.
Yeah, they become a kind of family, I would imagine, under those circumstances. Have you kept in touch with the women from either of those?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't see as much of them as I would like, but oh yes, definitely. And Anne Daniels, who I went to the poll with last time, she and I, have an enormous bond, which will never be broken.
That's great. That's terrific. I wanted to talk about climate change just a little bit. I understand that there's a lot of melting that's happening at an alarmingly fast rate. Do you want to talk just a little bit about that, about what you've seen and what you know of that, and what you know of things that might be done to reverse it or stop it a bit?
Well, I wish I knew the solution to, making it to reversing it. I mean, I only know what I read in terms of reversing it, but my experience of it is, I guess, over a period of, so I went to the North Pole first in 1997, then in 2002, and then I went again a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And I went, because I helped to guide an expedition, one of these last degree expeditions. And that was very interesting. I noticed a lot of changes. So first of all, let's think about that. So yeah, as I said to you, when you see the ice breaking up all the time, and sometimes there are bits of open water which you have to get around. And this last time I went, the water was sufficiently warm to be able to see effectively steam rising up.
Wow.
And I had never seen that. I mean, it's not steam, obviously, but it is warm enough to be condensing in the air. I'd never seen that before. And the other thing, which looked amazing, it was a great photograph, but alarming, was that for a couple of days there was this big sort of block on the horizon, and I didn't know what did it. I thought, well, I don't know, I have no idea what that was. Anyway, we trudged on, and eventually we got towards it, and it was a huge iceberg which had floated up north from Greenland or somewhere like that, and had clearly had enough open water to be able to float north. Well, that had never happened before. I mean, how many other icebergs were there? I mean, that's just not what was going on 20 years before. So those would be two of my observations. And the other, as I said to you, is that I doubt that anybody will ever undertake an expedition on foot from the north of Canada or the north of Russia to the pole again, because there's not enough time, because the ice is melting so fast.
It's a terrible loss. Have you ever been contacted by scientists or anybody who wanted to know more about the environment up there for their
Well, the last time that we went, we took when I was on this part of the as guides, we took with us a beacon, which were we took out and we just basically left us. It was just a small beacon, and we left it at the pole. And scientists can, basically it's NASA, I think, are using it to track the movement of the ice. Mm. So, and there's quite a move on to put a number of those beacons on, and I don't pretend to understand what they learn from that, but they, you know, the beacon lasts a certain amount of time, and for as long as it lasts, they can track where it's gone.
Sure, sure. It's a terrifying thing to think of a world without. I mean, it's bad enough to think of a world without polar bears, but to think of a world without the polar ice caps is, you know, one doesn't even know where to begin, really.
I agree. It's kind of fundamental.
Well, we're reaching our half-hour mark. Caroline, we appreciate you doing this very much. Do you have plans for another expedition at any point, or do you think you will at any point?
I would absolutely love to. There are other cold places I'd like to go, and I would very much. I've been to Greenland. I'd love to do more in Greenland. I'd love to. Honestly, I'd love to go anywhere right now. We're all locked down, aren't we? And yeah. I've had to put plans on hold. And the plan I've really got is South Georgia. So I was supposed to be in South Georgia now on an expedition. We were going to go to the Falkland Islands and then sail from the Falklands to South Georgia. And then there was a lot of wildlife in South Georgia, which really appeals to me. And then we were going to traverse over South Georgia, sort of following in Shackleton's footsteps. And I'm sure we will. And the whole expedition has been deferred for a year until next September. So fingers crossed, we'll all be able to move around and get there and do it.
Shackleton and Nansen and those people had the advantage of there being some unexplored space still left. It's a little different today, where everything is, as Taddy says in her play, where it's all on a map on my phone now.
Totally. I mean, you know, exactly. They were polar explorers, and really, one needs a new word, because I'm not a polar explorer, quite. I mean, we're going to the South Pole. If you were Shackleton or Scott, I mean, you know, they had no idea what they were going to find. At any point, they might have been going to fall into a great big hole or meet sort of marauding tribes of people or anything. Right. That was exploring.
Well, Caroline, we appreciate your doing this for us. It's terrific. We're going to make it available to the people who've seen the play or who are about to see the play. And if you're okay, I'll send you a copy of it to look at. You would be astonished at how many lines from the play you uttered over the last half hour without knowing it. Our playwright apparently did a pretty good job in her research, because you were saying some things that came more or less straight out of the script. So thank you for that, and best wishes on future expeditions and on this little anti-expedition that we're all on right now.
All right. Thank you so much. I hope it goes really well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Cheers.